As fears over the coronavirus continue to rise, stock markets in Asia and Europe take a massive tumble. This as oil prices crash by 30%, moves not seen since the global financial crisis more than 10 years ago. Also, a quarter of Italy's population now under lockdown as authorities scramble to contain the epidemic. However, both China and South Korea report a decrease in new cases of the coronavirus. And 5.5 years after a Malaysian airliner was shot down by a missile over Ukraine, 4 men are on trial in a Dutch court. The suspects, now fugitives in Russia, accused of helping to arrange the missile system. Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. But first to our top story. And Asian financial markets continue to tumble dramatically as the coronavirus continues to spread globally and a clash among the world's biggest oil producers shakes investors. Stocks in the Asian Pacific region plunged in trading, with European markets now doing the same, with Wall Street looking set to follow. This as oil prices dropped by more than a third. Earlier I spoke to our business editor, Brian Quinn.
The past week saw the latest meeting of the OPEC cartel in Vienna. Now, that cartel of oil-producing nations has been coordinating its production with ally Russia since 2016. Now, there have been some significant cuts recently. Those are due to expire. Those cuts are set to prop up oil prices, of course. Essentially, over the weekend, Moscow decided it could not go along with a new round of cuts, and this has led Riyadh analysts believe to punish Russia for ditching what's been called the OPEC Plus alliance. Now, in practical terms, the Saudis are saying that once the current cuts expire, they will not only be increasing production, but also cutting prices. Now, you got to keep in mind this comes as demand has been falling with travel restrictions amid the coronavirus outbreak. So we're seeing big downward pressure on oil prices right now. Oil prices can often be seen as a bit of an economic stimulus, encouraging car purchases, airline travel, that sort of thing. But in fact, in this moment where we find ourselves with this coronavirus outbreak, demand already tanking. So it's really not guaranteed that that will stimulate the wider economy. And in fact, it could just be a lose-lose situation. So that's why we're seeing the financial market super spooked.
And about a quarter of Italy's population, including the cities of Milan and Venice, have been placed in lockdown. Some 16 million people are now in virtual quarantine as authorities desperately attempt to curtail the spread of the virus. Italian police setting up controls at train stations while stopping all cars on main roads. And for those who don't abide by the rules, they could face up to 3 months in jail or a €206 fine. Monty Francis reports.
It was an unintended exodus of people from Milan on Saturday, just ahead of the government's announcement of a lockdown on much of the country's north. News of the quarantine leaked over the weekend, prompting many to get out of town, something authorities fear may cause the coronavirus to spread further across Italy and beyond. By Sunday, Milan's airport was almost empty, but several passengers were still resolved to leave the country.
They told us that we could go to Vietnam. We didn't have any particular problem. To be honest, I find this completely crazy.
Yes, I'm taking a risk, but I have to go to work, that's all.
In all, nearly 15 million Italians are now under quarantine orders, affecting most of northern Italy and the cities of Milan and Venice. Sunday, the streets of the economic capital, usually very busy, were almost deserted, just like in Rome, which so far has been spared from the quarantine. All of Italy has been affected by the closings of museums, cinemas, theaters, and concert halls.
I appeal to everyone by saying this: there are no regions of Italy that are completely immune. There are parts of Italy where the virus is currently circulating less, but the fact the virus spreads depends on people's behavior.
The epidemic is also shaking up the sports scene in Italy. Some football games have been postponed while others are taking place with no fans. The emergency measures are also causing havoc at the country's prisons. In Modena, riots broke out after a prison suspended family visits. Outside a prison in Naples, relatives held a protest to speak out against restrictions imposed on the inmates.
However, in China and South Korea, the number of new cases recorded each day has dropped. In China, outside of Hubei province, which was the centre of the outbreak, authorities reported no new locally transmitted cases for a second day in a row. Also in South Korea, the rate of increase in new infections fell to its lowest level in 11 days. In other news, the trial of 4 men suspected of being involved in the shooting down of that Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over Ukraine 5 years ago is underway in the Netherlands. The plane brought down by a missile fired from territory held by pro-Moscow rebels. The flight was on its way to Kuala Lumpur from Amsterdam. More than 2/3 of the 298 passengers aboard were Dutch nationals. Erin Agonki has more.
No marching, chants, or slogans necessary for this protest. Family members of the fallen instead set up 298 chairs outside of the Russian embassy in The Hague, one for each of the victims of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, and this to denounce Moscow's refusal to cooperate with the Dutch investigation.
We are not accusing the Russian of doubting the MH17 with this silent protest, but we are having a protest against the lack of cooperation of the Russian state in the investigation of the doubting of MH17.
We try to signify is that we think that Russia still has some answers to give us and to explain a lot of things that are still hidden in shrouds.
Last June, the Dutch-led investigation team named and charged 4 suspects with murder over the downing of MH17. The first 3 suspects are Russian citizens who worked for intelligence services, while the 4th, Ukrainian Leonid Karchenko, fought with Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. One of the accused, who served as Minister of Defense in the Moscow-backed Donetsk People's Republic, has openly dismissed involvement in the crash. Though prosecutors do not accuse the men of launching the projectile that brought down the civilian plane, they say they helped obtain and prepare the missile system. Because Russia and Ukraine do not extradite their citizens, however, the men are unlikely to take part in the trial. Initial proceedings, which mainly handle procedural issues, will last for up to 2 weeks, while the remainder of the trial, which could include testimonies from witnesses and relatives of the victims, is expected to run for up to 3 years.
With me now in the studio is Rob Parsons, our Chief Foreign Editor. Rob, what do we know about those 4 accused men?
Well, I mean, as we heard in that report, they're not being accused of actually pressing the button that launched the missile that destroyed the airplane. But what they are being accused of is being responsible for the gathering, first of all, getting hold of the missile launcher from Russia, organizing its transfer from Russia to Ukraine, being responsible for military intelligence in the Donetsk People's Republic, this breakaway separatist organization set up in eastern Ukraine, which is still trying to break away from Ukraine. Of the 4 men, none of whom is going to appear in this trial. They're all in Russia and refusing to leave. And there's no extradition treaty, so there's no reason to expect that they will leave. Of the 4, Igor Girkin is the most prominent. He's a former colonel in the first of all, the KGB, and then subsequently the Russian State Security Service, the FSB. He became the defense minister of the DNR, the Donetsk People's Republic, and was broadly speaking responsible for all sorts of operations, including this one, which led to the downing of the MH17 airliner. Of the others, Sergei Dubinsky, another former member of Russian military intelligence, and Oleg Pulatov, again, a former member of Russian military intelligence, also a member of Russian military intelligence, Spetsnaz, Special Forces troops, and Leonid Kharchenko, the only one who's not a Russian there. He's a Ukrainian who is a commander of one of the militias in the Donetsk People's Republic. As I said, they're not going to turn up at the trial, but they will certainly be examined in absentia.
Tell us about the setup of the trial as a result and some of the evidence that's going to be brought forward by the prosecution.
Well, the trial's taking place near Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam in Holland. It's the biggest criminal trial ever held in the Dutch in Holland. 3 judges are going to be presiding over it, no jury. It's going to be that sort of typical European investigative style. the evidence mostly is going to come from the joint investigative team, which is led by the Dutch, but includes also Australians, Malaysians, Ukrainians, Belgians, representatives of the passengers who were killed when that plane was brought down. They've acquired a mass of material without any cooperation from the Russian authorities, who are effectively refusing to participate. But what they've got is stuff like videos that have been collected from people on the ground who filmed the convoy, including this Buk missile launcher system, as it progressed on its way to eastern Ukraine from Russia. They've also got communications tapes from some of the suspects with their minders in Russia, talking about the delivery of the Buk missile system. They've got satellite imagery, and including the possibility, it's being discussed at the moment, nobody knows whether it really exists, of images of the actual launch of the missile, just as it was sent up to hit the airliner, photos, social media posts as well, including one from Igor Girkin himself, in which he said that the rebels have shot down another bird. He very quickly removed that post very shortly after it was put up.
Thanks for that, Rob Parsons. In other news, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be meeting with senior European Union officials in Brussels this Monday. Tens of thousands of asylum seekers have been desperately trying to cross the land border between Turkey and Greece. This after Ankara announced it would no longer prevent people from trying to enter the EU. Alexander Orcott reports.
On the offensive ahead of his meeting with European leaders. During a speech in Istanbul, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan gave a direct challenge to his neighbour.
Hey Greece, these people won't stay. They will move on to other European countries. So why are you bothered? We told you that if things don't change, we will open the gates. You did not believe us.
Turkey opened its gates to Europe more than a week ago, sending thousands of desperate migrants rushing towards the Greek border, where they've now set up camp and been involved in daily clashes with police. The move effectively shattered the 2016 agreement between Brussels and Ankara, in which Turkey agreed to contain the migrants in exchange for billions of euros from Europe. The deal will be at the centre of talks this Monday evening, when President Erdogan meets the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. The Turkish leader has frequently complained that his country has borne too much of the burden since 4 million migrants, mostly from Syria, flooded his country. He's expected to ask for more from Europe, including additional funding and concessions like visa-free access to the continent for Turkish citizens, before Turkey's gates to Greece are closed once more. The conflict in Syria will also be discussed, with Turkey demanding greater support over the conflict. Following earlier talks in Istanbul on Wednesday, the EU foreign policy chief already announced an extra 170 million euros in aid for vulnerable groups in the war-torn country.
And in news just coming in, Sudan's Prime Minister has survived an assassination attempt after an explosion went off near his convoy in the capital Khartoum. Abdullah Hamdok's family confirming that he is safe following that explosion, nobody having yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Hamdok was appointed Prime Minister last August after pro-democracy protests forced the military to remove autocratic President Omar al-Bashir in last April and replace him with a civilian-led government. And that's it for this edition. If you want to check out the stories we've been talking about in this bulletin, you can, of course, head to our website, that, of course, being france24.com. And do stay with us here on France 24 in the meantime.